Imagine becoming so rich that, after your death, people began saying your fortune was comparable to the wealth of the entire imperial government. Imagine becoming so powerful that almost no official dared to challenge you. And imagine having the personal protection of the most powerful man in China. For decades, this was the life of Heshen. He was one of the most powerful officials in Qing Dynasty China. He was also one of the most notorious corrupt officials in Chinese history. But there is something even more remarkable about his story. Heshen did not begin his life as a powerful minister. He was not born into the highest level of wealth. And he certainly did not begin with the intention of becoming China's most famous corrupt official. His rise began with something much simpler, the attention of an emperor. Heshen was born in 1750 during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor. The Qing Dynasty was then at the height of its power. China was enormous. Its population was growing rapidly. Its armies had expanded the empire's borders. And at the center of this enormous state stood the Qianlong Emperor. He ruled for more than 60 years and became one of the longest-reigning emperors in Chinese history. Qianlong was intelligent, ambitious, proud, and extremely demanding. He expected his officials to serve him personally as well as politically. And this was where Heshen found his opportunity. As a young man, Heshen entered government service. He was intelligent. He was ambitious. He was capable of learning quickly. But perhaps most importantly, he understood something that many officials failed to understand. The emperor himself was the center of power. Heshen learned how to speak to Qianlong. He learned what the emperor wanted to hear. He learned his preferences. He learned how to anticipate his decisions. And gradually, the young official became one of the emperor's most trusted servants. Once Heshen gained the emperor's confidence, his political career accelerated. He received increasingly important positions. He became involved in military affairs. He entered the highest levels of government. And eventually, he became one of the most influential men in the entire Qing court. But there was a problem. The more powerful Heshen became, the more opportunities he had to make money. And according to later historical accounts, he took advantage of almost all of them. Officials seeking promotion could offer gifts. Merchants could seek government favors. People involved in legal disputes could seek his protection. Government positions could become opportunities for private profit. Heshen allegedly accumulated wealth through bribery, corruption, manipulation of appointments, and control over government business. His influence reached into many parts of the imperial administration. And because the emperor trusted him, his enemies had very little ability to stop him. This created a dangerous cycle. Heshen became powerful because the emperor trusted him. And because he was powerful, people became increasingly willing to pay him for access to that power. The richer he became, the more powerful he became. And the more powerful he became, the easier it was for him to become even richer. But why did Qianlong allow this to happen? This is one of the most interesting parts of the story. Qianlong was not unaware of Heshen's influence. He knew that Heshen was controversial. He knew that other officials disliked him. But Heshen provided something extremely valuable to the emperor: loyalty. Heshen was willing to carry out the emperor's wishes. He could manage complicated political affairs. He could deal with officials. He could handle paperwork and finances. And, most importantly, Qianlong trusted him. In an imperial government filled with rival factions, trust was enormously valuable. For Qianlong, Heshen was not simply a corrupt official. He was a political instrument. And as long as Heshen remained useful, his corruption could be tolerated. Heshen's power became so extraordinary that he eventually controlled an enormous network of influence. He held multiple important offices at the same time. He became connected to powerful families. He arranged marriages. He placed allies into government positions. And members of his family benefited enormously from his political position. His son even married into the imperial family. Heshen had effectively created a political empire inside the empire. But this was still not the most shocking part. It was his wealth. Later Chinese historical accounts described Heshen's fortune as enormous. His properties included large residences. He possessed precious metals, jewelry, antiques, artworks, and other valuable objects. He reportedly owned huge quantities of silver. But here we need to be careful. You will sometimes hear the claim that Heshen was worth an astronomical amount of money, sometimes expressed as billions of dollars in today's currency. You may also hear the famous saying, "To bring down Heshen, the emperor only needed to die." The basic story is true in spirit, but many of the exact numbers circulating online are difficult to verify. The Qing government's records do provide evidence that Heshen had accumulated extraordinary wealth, but converting that wealth directly into modern dollars is highly speculative. What matters is not one precise number. What matters is the scale. When Heshen finally fell, the government confiscated an enormous amount of property. His fortune was so large that his name became permanently associated with corruption. And then came the event that changed everything. The Qianlong Emperor died. It was 1799. Qianlong had ruled China for more than 6 decades. And now his protection was gone. Heshen suddenly faced a new emperor, the Qing Emperor. And Qing had no intention of allowing Heshen to continue ruling from behind the scenes. Only days after Qianlong's death, Heshen was arrested. His properties were investigated. His wealth was confiscated. And the man who had once seemed almost untouchable suddenly found himself completely powerless. The accusations against him were numerous: corruption, abuse of power, misuse of government resources, accepting bribes, manipulating appointments, and accumulating wealth on a massive scale. The fall was incredibly fast. For years, Heshen had seemed untouchable. Now there was nobody left to protect him. Heshen was sentenced to death, but the Qing Emperor eventually allowed him to die by suicide rather than suffer a public execution. According to the traditional account, Heshen was ordered to take his own life. He was given a length of white silk, and the man who had once controlled enormous wealth and political power ended his life in disgrace. He was around 50 years old. His fortune was confiscated. His political network collapsed, and his name became a symbol of corruption. But there is an important lesson hidden inside Heshen's story. It is tempting to look at him simply as a greedy man, a corrupt official who wanted more and more money. But that explanation is too simple. Heshen was also a product of the political system around him. He understood that access to power could be converted into wealth. And he understood something even more important. As long as he had the emperor's trust, his enemies were almost powerless. The system allowed one man's personal relationship with the emperor to become more important than the normal mechanisms of government. And that made Heshen extremely powerful. But it also made his entire career fragile. Because his power depended on one person, the emperor. Once that person disappeared, Heshen's protection disappeared with him. This is why Heshen's story is more than a story about corruption. It is a story about power. For decades, he stood at the center of the Qing government. He had wealth. He had influence. He had connections. He had the emperor's trust. He appeared almost untouchable. But all of it depended on something he could not control: time. And eventually, the emperor died. Within days, Heshen went from one of the most powerful men in China to a prisoner awaiting his death. His wealth could not save him. His connections could not save him. His influence could not save him. And the emperor who had protected him for decades was no longer there. That may be the most fascinating part of Heshen's story. He spent his entire career accumulating power and wealth. But in the end, his greatest fortune was also his greatest weakness. Because everything he had built depended on one man's favor. And when that favor disappeared, so did Heshen's empire.